Hello, everybody. This is Georgianne Hughes, and this is The Bite Show. And this is part 2 with Olaf Hage and the audio file Blood Suckers, part 2. We've been talking about Mary Magdalene, Jesus, what was going on, scholars, and popular New Age writers. Hi, Olaf.
Hi, Georgianne.
Yeah, part 2.
Well, there's this claim, there's a new movie coming out that's starting to be shown around the country, and they've done ABC Nightline did a segment on it, and Coast to Coast AM did a segment recently on it. And in September of 2008, the DVD is coming out.
Yeah.
And the movie's called, or the documentary is called Bloodline.
Yeah, right.
And they're claiming that they have found evidence to support the idea that Jesus and Mary Magdalene were married, and that they may have the body of Jesus or the body of Mary Magdalene.
Well, how can that be? He ascended into heaven. As far as I know, he took his body with him.
Well...
And his bones.
Yeah, but... that they're not Christians, they don't believe in the resurrection, they don't believe in the ascension, they don't believe in anything other than another man like the rest of us, and so they're anti or non-Christian in their belief system. Okay, so you got to understand that, even though they try to sometimes say that they're true Christians or they're spiritual Christians or whatever, don't be fooled. There's nothing about them that's Christian. The word Christian means the Messiah, one who is of the anointed, spiritually anointed one, referring to Jesus' messiahship. It's Christos is a translation translation of Messiah, in effect in the Greek. It means anointed in both cases. So they're denying both the spiritual and the Davidic anointing of Jesus, so to speak. And you got to understand something. This is not a minor point. A crucified man like Jesus or an adulterous woman like Mary Magdalene, they cannot have legal heirs. They can't.
Yeah.
No legal inheritance for them. In those days, that child, if they had a child, that child was a bastard under the law. That child did not inherit from the father. Read Psalm 109. You don't have David wrote that psalm, by the way, and it was about people who were attempting to usurp his throne, and he was saying that their name is blotted out under the second generation. Their children shall be regarded as fatherless, having no father or mother.
Yeah.
Okay, so there's no inheritance here. There's no lineage, and there is no bloodline. Just not true. If their assumption about Jesus and Mary Magdalene being married and having children were true, there could be no bloodline from this couple because of the very nature of the situation. And look at this. If Jesus is condemned to be crucified, and according to the people who did this, and I might as well mention his name, Bruce Burgess is the main guy, and Renee Barnett, co-producer. She's an American. Bruce Burgess is from the British Isles somewhere. If they are the ones who we are to look for the meaning of all of this, their position is that Jesus and Mary Magdalene pulled off a trick, and when Jesus was crucified and sentenced to death, that he substituted another body. Well, you know what his authority for that is? The Quran.
Oh, dear.
Yeah, he believes the Islamic slander, or libel, because it's in the Quran, claims that Jesus, instead of dying for himself for the crime of which he was convicted of blasphemy, that he substituted some poor innocent guy and put him in his place and snuck off to France to have children with Mary Magdalene.
Oh, gee, do I smell a conspiracy against God?
Well, does it like a really nasty Jesus? Does it sound like a guy you want to follow who would do a thing like that?
Yeah. Oh, gee.
Suppose you were convicted of murder and you frame somebody else for your murder so that you can run off with this adulterous woman and have children with her in France while everybody was honoring you as having risen from the dead or having died for their sins when you hadn't done any such thing. I mean, that version of Jesus makes him out to be a scoundrel, an absolute scoundrel. There's nothing spiritually righteous about such a person.
Right.
Okay, so I mean, you can't, and of course that's the whole point of Islam, is to say that Jesus wasn't up to the task, and therefore we need the Reverend Sun Myung Moon. I'm sorry, I'm confusing two people making the same claim here. Muhammad and the Reverend Moon of the Moonies, the Unification Church, make the same claim. Jesus didn't do it right, so we're going to fix that problem. We're going to do it better. We've got a new improved religion here. Okay, and I won't bring Joe Smith into the argument either.
Yeah.
That these people come along and say, well, Jesus didn't get it right, I'm going to fix it. You watch out, So the claim there that Jesus had heirs, legal heirs, it's not possible. You couldn't, not if you were convicted of a crime. And especially so if Bruce Burgess were correct, which he is not, but if he were correct that Jesus had substituted another man to be crucified in his place, found somebody who looked like himself, and stuck that guy up there on the cross and watched him being tortured and crucified and executed in his place, not legally, but to trick the authorities. You understand? That's the story. Okay. If he tricked the authorities, then Jesus is still a condemned man under death penalty, a capital crime offense, and he's basically a fugitive on the loose here while he's having sex with Mary Magdalene in France, according to their version of history. Now, I mean, that makes it even more illegal. Okay, I mean, if he had been crucified and went through all of their execution process and revived afterwards, after they had done everything legally that they felt that they needed to do to him, and he had taken his punishment and survived it, okay, then his legal status would be at least he paid the price for the crime of which he was convicted. But they don't believe that, you see.
Yeah.
That the body was substituted on the cross, and he never got crucified in the first place, and the guy who was on the cross died. So Bruce Burgess and his fellow bloodsuckers, by which I mean people who are falling for this theory, they're suckers, they fall for it, they have put forward this new theory that the body of Jesus and or Mary Magdalene or some other member of the early family of Jesus is in southern France in a tomb, in a cave that they found and that only they know the location of, but it's documented in this movie, you see.
Oh, gee.
Documentary. It's not fiction, it's a documentary. And, well, it is fiction, but that's another story. And so they say, well, okay, you go and you look here in our movie, and we show you pictures. And I saw what they're talking about. They showed them on Nightline. So I've seen this now. I saw the body. I saw how it was laid out. It's underneath a Templar cross cloth. And all you can see is a little bit of, I think, the hair sticking out. And they were able to lower something down and get a sample of the hair. And they've had the DNA checked, and they got mitochondrial X chromosome DNA. It's very deteriorated, but they were able to tell from that it's from the Middle East somewhere, which doesn't tell us a whole lot. Leonardo da Vinci was from the Middle East. I mean, it doesn't tell you a whole lot.
Right.
So all they know is, well, it's a Middle Easterner. Oh, wait a minute. Joseph of Arimathea sailed off to Marseille, to Gaul, with 16 people. And that boat was crowded, and other boats followed. The Romans exiled people from the last century before Jesus, after in the time of Herod the Great and his sons, before that Jesus was born, and on down into the first century, throughout the first century, and into the first third of the second century. And they exiled these people to this same general area of southern France. It was called Gaul because Gaul is the Hebrew word for exile. That's where they put the Hebrew exiles. Okay? So for those who think that somehow or other that, there were just two people going to France, the only traditions we have is a whole boatload of people, none of whom is Jesus. There's a whole bunch of people, none of whom is Jesus, who go to France, and there's a whole bunch of other people from the Holy Land who go there. So if this is a person from Judea or Galilee from the first century, underneath that Templar sheet or flag or whatever it is, it's just got a big Templar cross on a white background, so we don't know exactly what it is. It's Templar cloth or flag or something. Whoever's underneath of that, okay, or whatever's underneath it, if they're from the Middle East and from the first century, it could be almost anybody. And it doesn't have to be a relative of Jesus at all. It could be all kinds of people who were exiled to France at that time, okay, or what was then called Gaul, the land of exile. So, or Gallia, the land of exile, to be precise. So the documentary shows this body. They can't get at it because it's, they need archaeologists to go in there and retrieve it. And they've talked to the antiquities people there in France, and they're working through legal channels, okay? Which is fine. And I'm happy they're doing that because that way, real archaeologists will be able to get down there and carefully sift the soil and verify, what's what. They also retrieved a box from a different hole, a different place in the area. This is René Chateau, by the way. This is the classic priest Saunier who had the secret, found the stuff in the altar stone and sold it apparently for a lot of money, got rich, built a Tour Magdalena, was the guy that all these strange things were told about 100 years ago, and it forms the kind of the core story that launches the Holy Blood, Holy Grail saga back in 1980-81. So what we're looking at here is ground zero of the modern mythos surrounding this idea. Nobody knows exactly what Saunier found over there at René Chateau. Nobody is clear on what Bruce Burgess has found over at René Chateau. Is it from the Holy Land? Apparently, but, bloodline X chromosome connections through the mitochondrial DNA to the Holy Land, we all have that, to be blunt. Everybody does. Every human being on the planet does, believe it or not. We all do. So it's not clear what component was looked at or because it was deteriorated and so forth. So we really can't be sure yet exactly what they've got, but it's an interesting clue. I got no problem with it being of the first century BC, AD, second century AD, because we know there were an awful lot of people exiled. We got the names of a whole bunch of them from Josephus and from the New Testament and so forth, in the early church tradition. We could probably give the actual names of at least 30 or 40 such people, okay? So it's not as if this has to be Jesus or Mary Magdalene. That's absurd. For him to jump to that conclusion is, I don't know, convenient. It's a way to get headlines. It's a way to get people to come watch your documentary and buy your DVDs. But do they have any proof that it's specifically Jesus or Mary Magdalene or any such person close to them? No, not at all. Now, they got a little box they found somewhere else in another cave, another hole, which they dug up, and I saw that also on the documentary on ABC. And in that little box is a little cup. It looks just like the one, suspiciously, from Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. Yeah, this is the kind of cup a carpenter would have made. All right, stand back. I'm going to drink it. All right. Well, this is the kind of thing that, it's a cup. Okay, it's a wooden cup. All right. So.
Yeah.
So how do you jump from there to, it's the Holy Grail?
Good point, Olaf.
A big leap, folks. Gigantic leap.
Yes.
Now, they say, well, they took some of these artifacts to Jerusalem. So they moved them from France. They took these artifacts out of France. I'm sure the French Antiquities Authority or whoever they are would be really happy about this. Took them to the Holy Land. Showed them to apparently some Jewish scholar in the Holy Land. One guy. Not a bunch of people. One guy. Not a Christian, but somebody who doesn't believe that Jesus was the Messiah. Doesn't believe in the miracles. Doesn't believe in the New Testament. So we know he's got a bias. And they show him to him, and they're telling him, well, we found this stuff we think may be connected to Jesus. Well, he says it with his British accent, which I won't do here. And the rabbi or scholar or whatever his official status is looks at him and says, oh, these are from the first century in Jerusalem. Now, I have a problem with this. Okay, no archaeologist that I know of would say that unless they did a carbon dating test, and even that would be a range of dates. Okay, for example, when they dated the Shroud of Turin using carbon dating, the date range they got was 1290 to 1360, which is a range of about 70 years, covering two different centuries. Okay, and that's fairly recently. You go back 2,000 years, and the margin of error gets bigger, not smaller. So the error range, when you go back 2,000 years, is at least a century, at least 50 years either side. So to say that it's the first century, if it's carbon dated, and of course there's no mention of a carbon date here at all, but if it were carbon dated, which is as precise as you're going to get, you'd still have a range that would have put you into another century. Okay, so it seems to me that, even if this was from the Last Supper, even if we whipped it off the table at the Last Supper, put it in this little box and shipped it to France, okay, and buried it there, and then Burgess comes along and takes it and goes carbon dates it, what's it going to date? 50 years before the Last Supper will put you into the preceding century, at least several decades into the pre-Christian era, okay? So to say it's the first century is impossible. Can't be true. Even if it were the actual Holy Grail, you couldn't carbon date it to just the first century. You see what I'm saying here? So I'm suspicious of the claim that it's first century. I'm also suspicious of the claim that it's from Jerusalem. How are you going to look at a plain wooden cup and other artifacts and say that they came from the city of Jerusalem 2,000 years ago, as opposed to, say, Bethany or Nazareth or Damascus, or, you see what I'm getting at here?
Yes.
How are you going to tell? I don't get this. Does it say made in Jerusalem, copyright, 30 AD on it? I don't think so. And so the claim that this Jewish guy, unknown, said, this is first century from Jerusalem, is bogus. It can't be true. Not in a scholarly, scientific sense. There's no way that you're going to be able to do that unless there's some inscription on there that says that it's from Jerusalem, but everything that you're saying is from Jerusalem would have to have that inscription on it. You follow me? Just because one thing in the box is from Jerusalem doesn't mean the rest of it is. I could be living in Nazareth, import something from Jerusalem which says made Jerusalem on it, as if they actually did that. And that doesn't mean everything else I got came from Jerusalem. Some of it could have come from Babylon or Damascus or Rome or whoever, or wherever.
Yeah.
There's no way to this is silliness now. These guys are making preposterous claims. So now he says, well, there's I have it from the highest levels of the church that these things are true. They believe, they agree with me that the gospel of Jesus is not correct, that Jesus wasn't raised from the dead, that and he goes on to this whole bunch of things here. Now, people weasel word things, so I can't be sure that that's what whoever the highest levels of the church told him.
Yeah.
Identify them. He won't say who they are. He won't say they're cardinals. He won't identify them. The only man he names is Bishop Spong of New Jersey, who's an Anglican. who's left the Anglican Church, gone off and got married. And okay, wait a minute here. Hold on a second. He's not from the highest levels of even the Anglican Church. He's not. If that's his source, and it seems to be the only guy who agrees with him, that he would name anyway. That's not the highest level. The highest level of the Roman Catholic Church, which would be the church when we talked about the church in this context here, the highest levels of the church would be, I don't know, the Pope and his immediate associates and advisors, who are not all cardinals, okay? Some are monsignors even, okay? But they would be at the highest level because they're intimates of in this case, Benedict XVI, or prior to him, John Paul II. And then immediately below them, there is this layer of cardinals all over the world, okay? So those are the two highest levels of the church. So when you're talking about the highest levels of the church, presumably we who are innocent, naive listeners must assume that they're talking about the Pope and his advisors and counselors or the cardinals.
Yeah.
Okay, so he even say, a cardinal told me? No. The only guy he names is this New Jersey Anglican bishop who got off and got married. His name is Spong, and, so fine. And he's been a gadfly. I don't want to call him an apostate, but, he's not a mainstream traditional Anglican anymore, and he's certainly not what you would call the mainstream Christianity. And so if that's his source, then that's not a source, okay, for the highest levels of the church. So I don't know where he's getting the claim from that there are people in high places in the church who agree with him. But then he turns around and he makes this very interesting statement. He says that he also consulted with Grand Master Mason in Paris.
Oh, gee.
Okay. A Grand Master, not the Grand Master, so it's not clear who that is, who says that they, not clear who they are, who apparently he implies were people who've done assassinations of other people, prominent people in the church, and here referring to the Catholic Church, would also kill Bruce Burgess because of what he was doing. Well, he's been working on this project for 4 years. The time to kill him was like a while back.
Yeah.
Now got the DVDs in production. What's wrong with this picture? I mean, the documentary's being shown. He's doing national television and international radio shows. If they wanted to kill him, they would have done it, And they asked him, well, you taking special protection? You got a bodyguard and so forth? No, well, I just, no, he's not. You see, anyway, so the claims here, it seems to me, are getting very, very tenuous. And therefore, I'm having a lot of problems giving any credit to these things. He says he's also talked to high officials in the Masons and the Templars and in the Priory of Zion. And then he names some of these people. He names a guy named Nicholas Haywood, who he said is the adopted son of an aide to Prince Charles. Now, at first, his associate, Rene Barnett, there said that it was an aide to Prince Philip. A Freudian slip, perhaps? Maybe they have been involved with Prince Philip in this project in some way. Who's to say what's going on here? But anyway, she first said Prince Philip, then he says, no, it's Prince Charles. Oh, okay. All right. I don't know what that meant, but that's what they said, so I'm just reporting to you. And apparently the aide's name was Lord Harold Haywood. Now, Lord Harold Haywood would mean that he's an aristocrat. His adopted son, Nicholas, is very secretive. He's got all kinds of ancient alchemical manuscripts, plenty of money to go out and buy all kinds of stuff. And he apparently is very deeply involved with the Priory of Zion, or so he says. And apparently he's interviewed in the documentary. I haven't seen that part. ABC didn't show that. So he says, well, he's one of my sources. And he's got another source. He says, a guy who lives out of his car.
Oh, gee.
I'm sorry.
Poor guy.
I know, but these are big authoritative sources he's using. A guy named Benjamin Hammer. I think I got the name right. He didn't spell it, so I'm having to assume that it's Hammer. And Ben Hammer's got a whole bunch of books and papers and stuff in his car, and he's hanging around southern France researching, I'm not sure what that means, researching this subject, and he's one of their sources. And we don't, I guess he's in the documentary too. So Spong, Hammer, and Haywood are their, I guess, on-camera sources. And then the rest of this stuff is about, cameras in caves being lowered into passages so you can see pictures of bodies and little boxes of wooden cups and stuff like that. Okay, what do we have here that has anything at all to do with Jesus? I'm sorry. And I missed something here. There's nothing here that points to Jesus or Mary Magdalene. Okay? Yes, it's Gaul. Thank you. Yes, this stuff could be really old, and maybe it comes from the Middle East, and maybe it comes from Damascus, and who knows where. Well, I know Damascus is in the Middle East, but you understand what I'm saying here. Maybe it comes from Jerusalem, maybe it doesn't. Maybe it's from the first century, maybe it isn't. Maybe these people have got something to do with Jesus, and maybe they are from the house of Herod that was exiled. Maybe they're from some other group that was exiled. There are all kinds of Jewish people exiled from the Holy Land for about a period of 150 years by the Romans to southern Gaul, to Gallia, as they called it, the land of exile. That's what Gallia means in Hebrew. It's the land of exile. That's where these people were sent. They were called Gauls because they were exiles. That's what the word means. The Gauls were the exiles. Okay, these were the people who lived there. And the reason for doing that was because of the tradition that the tribes who inhabited the area were descendants of the lost tribes of Israel. So they were putting them with some of the descendants of their own people up there who were also Gauls or exiles. Okay? And if you look at some of the traditions and some of the names here, the tribe of Aoda, which sounds very much like the tribe of Yehuda or the tribe of Judah. Some of the names of these people look. A lot of the Toita Dedanan, which means the tribe of Dan. It's obvious that whether these people were actually Hebrew exiles or not is not the point. The point is that the Romans assumed they were, and thought this is a good place to exile people from the Holy Land to, who were prominent people of royal families and rich people and stuff. Guys that they just didn't crucify right out. People they just didn't execute immediately. They executed 50,000 people by crucifixion at the siege of Jerusalem. 50,000 in the year 70. Back in the year just before Jesus was born, or actually right after Jesus was born, in the year 1 BC, they executed about, I think it's 2,000 or 3,000 people by crucifixion, among whom may have been Jesus' grandfather. They were constantly executing people, even of prominent families. And to be exiled, you probably had to basically bribe somebody. And I think that's what Joseph of Arimathea did. I think he bribed Herod Antipas to get his family a boat to Marseille. And they left Caesarea in 36 A.D., landed in Marseille probably in early 37. It was during the winter. It was a bad time to be sailing. They lost their sail, their oars. Just the currents carried them to Marseille, which is not unlikely. It sounds miraculous, but that's probably how Marseille gets discovered in the first place by the Phoenicians. So it's an old Phoenician Hebraic city. Phoenicia spoke the same language as the Jewish people. They were cousins or brothers of the Israelites, as Solomon and Hiram used to say. And so as a consequence, that place in southern France where they landed, where the exiles were sent, up that river there, the Rhone River, that's perfectly natural to land there. That's where the currents will bring you in, where the tide will bring you in. It's a perfectly natural place to come to rest, and it's a place where there already were a lot of people who had the same culture, the same language and background, and so on. So it's a logical place to exile people. So it's not surprising that there are traditions of Mary Magdalene, but none of Jesus, going to southern France. There's no tradition of Jesus going there. You know, and this is all modern stuff. This is all since the Priory of Zion faked papers and documents back in the 50s and 60s, which they admitted were faked and forged and were a hoax. Okay, this is all modern stuff. And people who want to believe in this, I think, are suckers. You're falling for something that people are doing to, you know, make money off of books and documentaries and so forth. And who, let's be honest now, if they had done their research as they claimed they did, then they knew this stuff was fake. They knew these documents were forged. They knew that they admitted it. They knew it wasn't real, and they pretended otherwise so that they could sell books and sucker you in to buying a book that attacked the foundations of Christianity for their own personal religious motives, whatever they may be. And if you think about that, it's going to put you in a different frame of mind as to what these people are up to. You're the sucker because you got lured into paying them for this. I'm a sucker too. I bought their books too. You know, I got all of their books. I got the Woman with the Alabaster Jar, the Templar Revelation, and the Vinci Code, and the Holy Blood, Holy Grail, and so on. And I'll end up getting the silly DVD on the Bloodline because I have to do it for my work, okay? I had to get it. You don't have to. I mean, I don't mind if you do. But for heaven's sake, please get a copy of the Gospel of Philip while you're at it, okay? Read it. Read the whole thing, not just that one little sentence. Read the whole thing, read it in context, and realize what it is, okay? And then you'll realize what that you're being had by these people who are misrepresenting what it says. Read the Gospel of John. Read the whole thing. Don't just read that one little verse there that they show you. You know, the Rabboni verse. Read the whole thing and think about it, and you'll see that it doesn't support their position. Don't just go with the partial story of the miracle at Canaan and so forth. Look at the whole passage. You know, look at the part where the mother of Jesus orders the servants to obey him. If he's the bridegroom, she doesn't have to do that. They will automatically obey him because he's the bridegroom who's supplying the wine for the feast. So they don't need to be told to obey him. They've already been obeying him for a couple of hours, you know, or however long they've been there. So clearly, and notice this part. Mary says to Jesus, they have no wine. And Jesus says, well, what does that got to do with me? He's the bridegroom? And his answer is, well, what are you looking at me for? I'm just a guest. I mean, it's not my job to supply wine, lady. What are you doing? Hey, knock it off. You're going to blow my cover. They're going to realize who I am. It's not my time yet. You know, they're going to realize I can, you know, make wine out of water. I don't want them to know that. He says, oh, come on. Oh, all right, mother. You know, all right, we got some water jars. Okay, you guys, I want you to do whatever this man tells you to do. You see, the context is that he's not the bridegroom. He's not in charge of the feast. He's not in charge of the wine. It's got nothing to do with him. What are you bothering me for, lady? I don't have anything to do with the wine. No, back off here. Hey, let me enjoy this. It's just a party. But Mary says to him basically, look, have some compassion on these people. They're not drunk enough yet. Give them some more wine. So if you think about what's going on here, it's an amazing thing that anybody would interpret that passage as meaning that Jesus was in charge of the wedding feast, that he was in charge of the wine, and that he was the bridegroom and so forth. Nonsense. He's clearly not in charge. His whole reaction to the situation is, hey, this isn't my problem. I'm not supposed to be supplying wine. What are you asking me to do this for? It's not my time to perform miracles yet. I'm not out yet, I got to wait for John the Baptist to do that whole dove thing on my head, routine. It's not my time yet. What are you doing? Don't push me into this. And she says, oh, come on, please. She has to urge him to do this, which means he's not in charge of the wedding feast. He's not the governor of the feast. He's not the bridegroom. He's none of the titles that have been attached to him. And the whole thing is based upon they never named the bridegroom. How suspicious. Well, wait a minute. They're talking about Jesus. I mean, if they were going to name the bridegroom, what difference would it make? Okay, the bridegroom, let's say the bridegroom's name was Charlie. Okay, Charlie the bridegroom. Now, are you happy? So what? I mean, it doesn't matter. It wasn't important. And papyrus, it was expensive, and parchment was expensive. You're not going to throw in extra words if you don't need them. So, there's no reason to tell you who the name of the bridegroom was. It wasn't important. It wasn't part of the story. So, what Bruce Burgess and Renee Barnett are doing here in this new documentary is pushing an idea that they actually don't have any real evidence for. They don't have any proof of who this is or what it is.
Oh, but it'll sell books.
Oh, it'll sell books.
Yeah.
It'll sell DVDs, actually. Now, there's a book out there called The Jesus Tomb. And they're pushing this idea that don't pay any attention to Bruce Burgess. We got the tomb. It's over here in Jerusalem. And we found his bone box, and all the bones have since been removed and buried elsewhere. But we've got the bone box of Jesus, and we can prove it, and so forth. And so they got their own little version of the story. Now, they both can't be right. And Burgess makes the point of saying, now listen to this. He says that this whole Talpiot tomb of Jesus thing in Jerusalem that Simca Jacobovici and his team documented in their documentary, he says that's nonsense. Don't pay any attention to their tomb. I got the real tomb over here in France. Their stuff is just, do you call it a hoax or something? I forget what the term he used was. But he doesn't put any stock in that at all. So he's convinced that the Jesus tomb story that was so big last year, he's saying, no, that's nonsense. Okay, now I'm sure Jacobovici's going to look at Burgess's stuff, and if anybody asks him, and he's going to say, oh, Burgess is wrong. He doesn't know what he's talking about. Well, one thing we're sure of, one of them is pulling the wool over your eyes. One of them's taking you for a sucker. One of them is telling you something that doesn't have any support. And, take your pick. I think they both basically are wrong because their information just doesn't live up to stuff. The names in the Jesus tomb are well-known names at the time of Jesus. That's true. Okay? Matthew, Mariamne, Joseph, Jesus, Joshua, whatever you want to call it. Mary is a kind of a Latin version of her name, and so forth. Maria. These are very common names of the time. And there were a lot of people by that name. You get their book, which I did. See, I'm a sucker. I bought their book, the Jesus Tomb book, went through it with a fine-tooth comb. And what I discovered was that the numerical statistical odds that they calculate are highly misleading because the number of people buried in the vicinity of Jerusalem in that time frame was probably over 1 million. And the numbers that they're using are way low. They are not giving you an accurate representation of the statistical context. But having said that, even with their numbers, they would acknowledge that there were multiple women who would fit that description, There's a lot of people. But he said, well, the odds that these would all occur together in the same tomb are very unusual and very remote statistically and yada, yada, yada. We don't need all of those calculations. We have a tomb that we know existed at the time that would have contained exactly what we found in this tomb, with exactly these names. But it's not the tomb of the family of Jesus. It's the tomb of Simeon Boethus, the high priest. It's his family who had all of these names. These people are well known from his family line in the writings of Josephus. You can go back and read it for yourself and look at the index. If you got Whiston's version, it's got an index in the back. Look up the Mariamnes. There's a bunch of them there. But the Mariamne you want is the one who was the daughter of Simeon, the high priest. And she has descendants and family connections there. And she's the queen. She is married to King Herod. She's the queen of Judea. She's the queen of, if you will, of Israel at the time. She's married to the king, King Herod the Great. And so this is not any old tomb. It's got an antechamber. And guess where it faces? This tomb actually, there's a line of direction that you can follow from this tomb right at the Herodium where King Herod himself was buried. I don't know if you can see it by eye from there or not, because you'd have to go and actually sight to see if it was there. But the Herodium was on the top of a prominent hill not too far from Bethlehem. And this tomb is south of Jerusalem on the general way toward Bethlehem. And so this so-called tomb of Jesus. And the way it's structured, there are a number of sight lines. You have to understand that they couldn't have any right angles in this tomb, because there's a rule against right angles. They were superstitious about it. Josephus refers to it when they tried to make the temple four square. They brought a curse down on Jerusalem, and that's why the Romans came and destroyed the city. There's a little reference to it there. They didn't like things being four square unless the temple itself was four square. That's okay. But if you had a little house or a tomb or something like that, it shouldn't be four square, because in their language that meant righteous. And if you were claiming to be righteous, only God is righteous, so only the temple can be four square or righteous, you see, right angle. And so therefore, they had the superstition that you couldn't have, for example, your tomb be righteous or right-angled. And so there are no right angles in this tomb. So it's clearly a very superstitious tomb of one of the priestly clans in at the time. This right-angled tomb has, non-right-angled tomb, I'm going to be careful here, is equipped with, let me see here, I got to count them real quick in my head here. I think it's 6 burial niches. When you come in, there are 2 to your right, 2 to your left, and 2 in front of you. And no right angles anywhere. Okay, so you come in, and all of it's all trapezoidal shape. It's all distorted. Okay, now people think that's because they didn't have proper archaeological, or what do you call it, architectural skills in those days. No, this is done deliberately. And there was an art to it, and it was very precisely done. And they would angle the lines to point at special places, like the Herodium of King Herod, and the city of Jerusalem and the temple. So they would point some of these lines toward special places. Since they weren't going to be right angles, they could point them anywhere, so that's what they did. So this would honor King Herod and honor the temple of Jerusalem. Well, of course, the guy was a priest. He served in the temple. His daughter was married to Herod the Great, who was the king, so it's pointing at his tomb. Gee, not complicated. This is a simple situation. The names exactly match the names of the family that have come down to us. And where we have blank ones, we know who they were most likely to have been. There are 2 bone boxes that are located in the niche, which is in the far corner as you come in the door on your right. On the right hand is the leading family. The far corner away from the door is one of the more prominent positions. The far wall away from the door, facing the entrance, is a very prominent position. And there is the bone box of Mariamne the Great, as they're calling her, in that spot. Well, Mariamne the Great is the queen. She is the daughter of the high priest Simeon. She has one of the two most elaborate bone boxes, most elaborately decorated in the tomb. Okay, so it's the queen's box. Okay, queen's bones in the box. That box is partially removed from its slot. Now, the reason for that is this: it's not her slot. That slot belonged to the firstborn son of Simeon the high priest. And the next one over on the far wall was to his second-born son. Namely, these are Eleazar and Joazar, the two sons of Simeon the high priest. The family had a falling out with these two sons. They sold out the family. There was a big fight. There's a long story that goes behind this, which we don't have time for here. But basically, there was a big falling out in the family, and those two sons were blotted out of the family. They were arrested by the Romans. They were put on trial. There's a whole big story that goes with this. Josephus tells part of the story in one book, the Antiquities, and another part of the story in another book, the Wars of the Jews. And there's other information from the Talmud and other things you can piece together from the New Testament and so forth. It's a big story. Bottom line is, one of these men, or both of them, I believe, personally, are the men who killed Zechariah, the father of John the Baptist, between the altar and the holy place. They're the only people who were in a position to have committed the murder. They're the only people between the altar and the holy place at the time the guy was murdered. The only people who could have done it, technically. If what Jesus says is true, and I believe it is correct, then these are the men who murdered the father of John the Baptist. They were put on trial for that and other things that they did involving the insurrection that occurred after the death of Herod the Great. So these guys are not in their slots in Simeon's tomb. Those holes are empty. But Mariamne, who should have been buried with Herod the Great as his wife, is not buried with Herod the Great in the Herodium. She's put in the spot where the firstborn son belonged in Simeon Boethus' tomb, the high priest's tomb. So, but only halfway in, because she's not really his son, but she deserves a place of honor, so she's halfway in to designate that she belongs elsewhere, that is with King Herod. But he divorced her. He divorced her because Simeon had prophesied in favor of Jesus, which got him removed. He's the Simeon you see right there in Luke's Gospel. And that prophecy you see when he dedicates Jesus in Luke's Gospel there, that's the Simeon who had been in the temple, comes out and prophesies, as the high priest did on that day. And so this is the man who is buried in the next most prominent slot, which is the one to the right of hers, which is on the side wall. And he's got the most elaborate bone box in the tomb. It's his tomb. He was the first guy in the hole, the first guy in the tomb, okay? And therefore, they didn't label it. They gave him a very elaborate bone box. Everybody knew who he was. He's in the prominent slot in the tomb, which by tradition they understood, so they didn't have to label it. They knew who he was. Everybody knew in the family whose box that was. There was no need to put his name on it, see. But when you put Mariamne the Great, his daughter, in the slot that had been reserved for Joazar, or Eleazar, I guess it was, whichever one. I forget who was the elder off my head here. But if she's put in his slot, then you got to label it, you see? So they had to put a label on it. Now, Matthias and or Matthew, as they're calling him, but it actually says Matthias, and Jesus, or Joshua, here, these two guys are sons-in-law married to daughters of Simeon Boethus. They are in the tomb because it's a more prominent family than their regular family. They've married daughters of the high priest, which makes them high priests. They are adopted into Simeon Boethus' family, and they become high priests ahead of Eleazar and Joazar, who apparently are black sheep of the family. They were estranged from the family, as I said. So he makes his sons-in-law high priests ahead of his own blood sons because of the problems in the family, as I'm mentioning. And so Jesus, who is married in from another family line, and Matthew, who comes from all places, Sepphoris, where Mary the mother of Jesus and Joseph of Arimathea probably came from originally, which is right next to Nazareth, which is sort of outside the outskirts of, it's a walking distance away from the Sepphoris. So this guy, Matthias, comes from there. That's his family line. And his wife was another daughter of Simeon Boethus. So he married his daughters off well, see? And they are married into priestly families, and then they become high priests, and they're right there in Josephus. You can see the family line. So here's this tomb they found, which they're falsely attributing to another Jesus, the one in the Bible, okay? But this is the Jesus who was high priest, who was married to a daughter of Simeon, okay? And he has a son named Judah, okay, which is fine, and I'm sure he did, but he died as a boy, so he never becomes high priest, and indeed, you look at the Josephus' list of high priests, and no, there's no Judah who becomes high priest out of that family. It reverts over to another line, which is that of Ananias, who has a son-in-law named Caiaphas at the time Jesus is crucified, who was high priest. And they dominate the high priesthood throughout much of the rest of the first century. So this is the family of the old high priestly family that was overturned by the guys who crucified Jesus. Okay, now think about it for a minute. Two groups of families, one that likes Jesus in the house of David, one that doesn't. Okay? And the one that likes Jesus, okay, two of their sons, Eleazar and Joazar, basically flip to the other side. They become traitors. They go over to the house of Annas, basically, to those who were opposed to the Davidic claims of the family of Jesus. So basically, they're considered traitors, and that's the basic reason they're not in their tomb slots in the tomb there, even though they did become high priests. But they're appointed by Herod the Great, and or at least one of them is, and then by his son Archelaus. So this is a family tomb that's got nothing to do with Jesus directly, but it does have something to do with him indirectly. They're very friendly to the family, probably knew the family of Jesus personally, because the son-in-law there, Matthias, comes the son of, I think it's Theophilus of Sepphoris, which is a town, and you got to go to the Talmud, which is documented in Joachim Jeremiah's Jerusalem in the time of Jesus for all that information. But anyway, he is the man who is from the town that would have known the family of Jesus, so that's probably how they got in contact and why Simeon then recognizes Jesus, the baby, when he's brought in, knowing who this child is by his genealogy, in other words, and therefore he's able to prophesy over him in Luke's gospel. So all of this is, it makes perfect sense when you know who these people are and what their rank was, and that's why Simeon was prophesying that day, and that's why he was speaking to a whole crowd, and it's why he was able to go into the temple that day when nobody else was allowed to, because it's Yom Kippur. And we know it's Yom Kippur because Anna the prophetess, a few sentences later, she's saying that, well, we don't know what she's saying exactly, but she's saying something about him. The whole crowd is silent and listens to her, and it says that she had been fasting and praying overnight in the temple, day and night, without leaving, okay? Only one night a year could you do that. It's locked the rest of the year. That was Yom Kippur. So we know that this is the end of Yom Kippur. The final ceremony is completing Yom Kippur, where the high priest goes into the Holy of Holies and he cites the sacred name 3 times, and everybody's real quiet in case they can hear him, and they listen for the bells on the hem of his garment in the Holy of Holies, and there are people ready with ropes tied around his waist to haul him out if he should faint or die in there, and so on and so forth. That's all. We know what this is. And so he comes out there then, and every year he gives a prophecy. Well, Caiaphas, that year, that Jesus was crucified, the preceding Yom Kippur, had prophesied that one man must die for the sake of the nation, that the Romans not come and destroy our holy place, okay? Well, John says that he prophesied not of himself, but of the Holy Spirit that had inspired him to say these things. So here's the guy from the competing Holy Family from the competing priesthood, who's prophesying that Jesus, a member of the Holy Family, of the house of David, of the royal line, is going to have to die for the sake of the nation. Okay, and Johnson is saying that this was a legitimate prophecy. I mean, the Holy Spirit actually inspired him to say these words. Well, go back to the Gospel of Luke. Here's Simeon, another high priest, comes out, prophesies, and again, we are to understand that the Holy Spirit has inspired him to say these words, behold, this child is set for the fall and the rise of many in Israel, and for a sign to be spoken against. And then he turns to Mary and he says, and a blade shall pierce your heart also. Also. Meaning that a blade was going to pierce the heart of Jesus as well. And now it says a sword, but it really means a blade. If you go back to the prophecy that he was taking off from, it's in Zechariah, and it's clearly a reference to the spear that pierced Jesus. So the spear, sword, the Romans had real long swords, real short swords. They had real short spears, real long spears, and it's not clear exactly what they're referring to here, but they seem to be interchangeably using the word in question to refer to both spears and swords, so I think the word blade is a better translation here if we could get out of the bloodsucker thing and the whole obvious reference there to certain movies, which I don't want to get into. But anyway, what we're looking at then is a story that tells us that the family of Simeon Boethus and these particular people who were related to it, who were buried in this tomb. Of course, the wives normally, unless they were queens or something special, didn't get names on their bone boxes. High priest would, except for Simeon himself, who didn't need one. His daughter, who'd married King Herod, she needed a name because she was prominent, and they wanted to make sure nobody confused her with his son, and so forth. That kind of inscriptions that are in the tomb that was found at Talpiot, south of Jerusalem, so-called Jesus' tomb, all of those can be explained. Now, since this family was close to Jesus, since he prophesied about Jesus, since they obviously suffered because of their connection with Jesus, it isn't surprising that when James, the half-brother of Jesus, is beheaded, is stoned. I'm confusing it with the other James for a moment there. In the year 62, 63 A.D., there's this stoning of James, the half-brother of Jesus. The cousin James, the son of Salome, was beheaded earlier in 42 or so. So here we are about 20 years later, the other James, James the Lesser, is being executed, and he's stoned to death. And his body, it says, was gathered up by the family and buried somewhere. They took his body and they gathered his remains, which were, after he'd been stoned and obviously mangled and so forth, gathered up his remains and they buried him somewhere else, somewhere not too far away. Now, he was originally from Galilee. They were not going to carry his body back up all the way up there. Had to be buried somewhere nearby. The tomb of Joseph of Arimathea was well known as a place where the family buried bodies, and these people were really angry at James, so you wouldn't want his body desecrated, so you got to put it someplace where they won't look. So you carry it down to Talpiot, to the tomb of Simeon Boethus, which is a Levitical tomb that nobody would think to go in. There's still family members around at the time, and they say, look, here, we'll let you bury him in our tomb. That way, nobody will find him. Nobody will expect it to be down there. He'll be safe. His remains will be protected there. So the family of Jesus took the body of James the Less, the eldest son of Mary after Jesus, took him down, his remains, buried them in the Talpiot tomb's antechamber, since it wouldn't have been proper to put it in the inner part, and left him in the outer antechamber. When the bulldozer, about almost 30 years ago, came along and wrecked the antechamber, that bone box of James was spilled open. Kids took out his skull and were playing soccer with it.
Oh, my gosh.
Actually, soccer with it. Now, these were Arab kids, because Jewish kids wouldn't touch a dead bone.
Yeah.
Okay. The mother of one Jewish kid tells his mother that these kids are desecrating a skull from a Jewish tomb, and would she come do something? Mommy, they're kicking around a Jewish boy's or man's skull. They're playing soccer with it. Come do something. So she chases away the kids, chases the Arab boys away. She gathers up the bones. She's a woman, so she's considered unclean every 30 days anyway. You follow me?
Yeah.
So she's got no problem picking up the bones. So she gathers them up into a plastic bag. These are the bones of James now. Gathers them up into a plastic bag. She takes them to the Jewish Antiquities Authority. They come back and they realize what's happened here, that a major tomb has been found. And they send a bunch of archaeologists out to quickly, because the Jewish, Orthodox Jewish laws, you can't have this stuff exposed for, I think it's 48 hours is the maximum time. So they had to do all their antiquities, archaeological work, digging this stuff out, and what normally should take months, they did in 48 hours or less, because they counted some of the time already. They did it over the weekend. They had the Sabbath to work on. I mean, it was just terrible conditions to have to do all this work. And so here was the high priest Simeon Boethus. Here was Mariamne the Great, the queen of Israel, married to King Herod, the daughter of him. Very famous people in Josephus's writings. All these very important, prominent high priests. All of these people had their remains given the bum's rush because of the Orthodox rabbis being so picky and so influential and powerful in the government. And the remains were not properly cataloged or investigated, and so they were buried in some unknown mass grave somewhere, and their bone boxes put in a warehouse, a la Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Oh, my goodness.
And, it's sad.
Yeah.
Done to the remains of these famous and important people in Jewish history. It's a desecration to these great Jewish leaders and these great priests of Israel. And so the remains were treated this way. And the bone box of the high priest Jesus, who was one of the successors around, I think it was around 6 A.D., I think he was high priest, were just put in this warehouse. And along comes, God bless him, he's trying, Simcha Jacobovici and his people, and they look at this bone box and they think it's Jesus of Nazareth, because he's the son of Joseph, of a Joseph, but a different Joseph. The name was a dime a dozen. My goodness, look at all the Josephs in the New Testament. So they think that's who it is. And they see he's got a son named Judah, and so they think, aha, here's proof that Jesus had a son. Well, they compared the DNA of this Jesus with Mariamne, his sister-in-law, and they said it's not the same family.
Yeah.
Evidence showing that she's Mary Magdalene and this is Jesus of Nazareth.
Yeah.
Well, there's just evidence that these two people aren't from the same family, which, of course, I already told you. He married into her family. He married her sister. So naturally, his bone box is going to contain different DNA than hers. They're not related. They're not supposed to be. So it's got nothing to do with Jesus and Mary Magdalene, you see. But then they find the bone box remains of James on the outside, and there's a patina on the box which shows where it was buried and the silt and stuff that it was exposed to, and you can track it to a particular tomb. And they think they can show that the James ossuary was in the same tomb as these other ossuaries. You see the point here? Yeah. And it was, but in the outer chamber, not the inner chamber. It's not a member of the family. And when they get around to doing DNA checking, if they can, because too many idiots have been cleaning these things now, but if they could ever DNA check that bone box's remains with the other people, they will see that it doesn't fit their scenario. That bone box DNA won't match the bone box DNA of Jesus, the father of Judah, who they've got in the Talpiot too. And it should, if their theory were right. So you see, the all this cleaning of these boxes and all of this stuff that's going on is making it harder and harder for true archaeologists to find out the truth. And so we got these amateur filmmakers messing around and mucking around with all of this stuff and obscuring some of the evidence. Well-intentioned though I think Simca Giacomovici is, I don't fault him. I think he's a decent guy. This Burgess character I'm not so sure about. Okay, I don't know about him. I don't know enough about him to tell one way or the other. But, they're all suckers falling for these theories that are not true. Okay? Now, look, Giacomovici consulted with a Jewish scholar in the United States who was giving him advice about the names Mariamne and other things. And this guy told him that, well, Mariamne is a very rare name, and, this is probably the only Mariamne, and this is another way of saying Mary Magdalene, because there's a document in the 4th century that calls Mary Magdalene Mariamne. 4th century? That's 400 years too late, or 300 years too late, number one. If I'm correct, it's 400 years too late. And number two, we don't even know who wrote that document, and we don't know how reliable it is. And besides, after all those centuries, how in the world can that be an early source? Okay? But aside from all of that, all you have to do is look at Josephus, look up the index, and you've got all the names right there. And you can track this family down. It's not hard. So to say that there's no other family and no other way to interpret this stuff and that we don't know is, to say the least, disingenuous. Okay? Somebody's either not thinking clearly. Maybe they had too much to drink and they weren't thinking clearly. I don't know what the problem is here. He said he talked to this guy in a bar, so I don't know what that means. But somebody's not thinking clearly here. Or somebody's not doing their research properly. Or somebody's not being too straightforward about this. There's nothing complicated here. This is clearly, if you're going to match this up statistically, it's 100 times, if not 1,000 times, more likely to be the tomb of Simeon Boethus as the tomb of Jesus of Nazareth. And, and they even point out that the bone box of the Jesus in this tomb is very nondescript compared to the one for this unnamed person, who I think is Simeon Boethus, and this Mariamne, the great box. Okay? I mean, if you look at their remains, you have to argue that they're more prominent by far than the Jesus guy. And, of course, historically that's true. Simeon Boethus served for a couple of decades as high priest. The Jesus high priest, I think he only served for a year or so. He hardly served at all. So he's not high priest for very long, and not a very prominent one at that. He's not going to have a prominent box. You got to put his name on it so you know who he is. But other than that, he's not going to have as prominent a bone box as Simeon Boethus would have, or as Mariamne the queen would have. So when you really look at the tomb, every single detail of the tomb, its shape, its measurements, the directions the lines of sight point, the three skulls, which, by the way, form a kind of an arrow, the floor, every little detail that is in the Talpiot tomb points to Simeon Boethus' family. None of it, really, other than the coincidence of some, but not all of the names, points to Jesus. The Matthew guy, what's he doing in there? It's mentioned in the New Testament, it's not the Gospel, but unless you explain who Matthew is, I happen to know that he is, in fact, a half-brother of Jesus, so I think he does belong there. But Giacomovici doesn't know that. He's sticking him in there, and he thinks he's just an apostle, and he's saying, well, as a prominent apostle, it's possible that they would have honored him by sticking him in there. Yeah, the other apostles don't count. The other writers, the other gospel writers don't count. Where's Luke's tomb,
Yeah.
I mean, why not put them in there, too? So that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And I understand that people will continue to believe what they want to believe. They won't care. I would argue one last point here. We know that the Talpiot tomb was broken into in the time of the Templars.
Oh, yes.
They were in Jerusalem.
Yeah.
Because we can date the silt that got in there. We know the tomb was broken into. They managed to determine that. So the Templars looked at the boxes in this tomb. They saw the names and, like Giacomovici, jumped to the same false conclusion. They could just as easily have assumed, if they didn't know who this really was. I mean, if they knew who it was, it's possible they could have taken some of the remains out of these boxes back to Gaul, to southern France, perhaps buried them in Hage.Typhon in the very tomb that now Bruce Burgess is looking at, and they might have assumed, you see, that this was Jesus or Mary Magdalene. They might have assumed, if they knew the true story, that this was the bones of some prominent high priest, either Simeon or Matthias or Jesus, the high priest. It depends on what they were looking for. Okay, maybe they knew that this was Mariamne, the wife of Herod, who he divorced right after Simeon prophesied so favorably about Jesus. He got angry at her, and he divorced her. And maybe they were trying to reconcile this by honoring her. Maybe they knew it was Mariamne, the Queen of Israel. Maybe they took her bone box back. They said that it was ajar, as if it had been opened. So maybe they took her skull and remains back and laid them out there in that cave at Hage.Typhon and covered it with a Templar flag. And maybe indeed there were artifacts, as there often are in these ancient tombs. In the outer antechamber, where the ossuary of James would have been, the outer antechamber, of course they saw Jacob there, so they probably didn't realize it was James. But in the outer antechamber, they would have had cups and votive candle holders and things of that sort. Okay? And it is from Jerusalem, you see. It would have had Jerusalem soil on it, and maybe they did retrieve it from that Jerusalem tomb, from the antechamber, and maybe they also took the bones of the woman who was the Queen of Israel, thinking that she was dishonored by being buried in her brother's tomb and sticking halfway out and so forth. And maybe they interpreted that as an insult to her. It wasn't intended that way. It was meant by the family to indicate that she didn't really belong in this tomb. She belonged in Herod's tomb, but he wouldn't allow her to be buried there, you see. So maybe the Templars said, look, let's show her some mercy and some respect. We'll take her back and bury her in Hage.Typhon, Gaul, and honor her there, in the land of the kings of Jerusalem, because that's who the Templars thought they were. That's who they thought King Baldwin I was, the king of Jerusalem. That was his title. They were honoring him as king of Jerusalem, and if that was their interpretation, that he was of the house of David, of the line of Judah, if they thought that this was the line that they were honoring, then when they go back to France, where Baldwin I's estates were and where these other prominent Templars were, it would have seemed to them a reasonable thing to do, where so many royal people had been exiled to take her bone box back there, or not her box, but her remains back there, and give them, if you will, a more honorable burial, a more fitting burial in their eyes in this site at Hage.Typhon, which Bruce Burgess is in the process of getting excavated by the French authorities. So I hope that the archaeologists in France will do a careful job. I hope that the DNA can be compared ultimately with Mariamne from the Talpiot tomb. But they assume that that's Mary Magdalene because of Giacomovici's mistakes. And so people may jump to the conclusion that that is Mary Magdalene. It isn't. But at least I don't think so. I mean, it's also possible that they found Mary Magdalene's remains somewhere else in Gaul and transferred them there and buried her there. Tomb, and her remains are traditionally located elsewhere in France, and there are shrines devoted to her, showing where she died and showing where she was buried, and with parts of her body still kept as relics. So I really doubt that there are two Mary Magdalene bodies in France. So I don't think that that's who it is. I'm pretty convinced in my own mind, although I can't prove it yet, until we do some DNA work here, until they do all of their tests, that they're going to find ultimately, when they finally sit down with a rational bit of thinking here and putting the evidence together, that this is the old Queen of Israel who they have found there, and that it's her remains that have been transferred. Now, if it's not a woman, so far they've only found female DNA from the hair. If it's not a woman, if they find Y chromosomal hair, they find that this is actually a male, it may be somebody else from that tomb, or somebody from some other tomb that they found. The one thing we do know is that there seems to be a challenge to the faith of the Templars at this time, that they begin to lose interest in defending Jerusalem, that they begin to lose interest in, if you will, the Christian crusader causes. And eventually, by the end of that century, they allow Jerusalem to fall back into the hands of the Muslims by 1187, I guess it is. And so from that time forward, they don't really seem to care. Now, other people go and launch crusades and so forth, but the Templars basically, they're sort of half-hearted about it. On the Fourth Crusade, they kind of get off the boat and they say, well, we're not going to go any further. Their attitude after this time is very strange. So it is possible that they did find the Talpiot tomb. Somebody did at that time, somebody with the Templar group. It is possible that, like Giacomovici, they made the false assumption that this was the tomb of the family of Jesus and that there was a box there for Jesus. It is possible that they went back to France with some of these remains and honored some of them, thinking that this was Mary Magdalene or Jesus or whatever. Who knows? A lot of possibilities exist. But with DNA research and with better historical research that the Templars could do, we're going to be able to prove, I think, who these people are and who they're not. And I think we'll be able to show that it's not the family of Jesus, that these people don't have the right DNA relationships. And, if enough, it will be able to pin this down and finally put to rest the bloodline, I'm not going to call it hoax, we'll just call it the bloodline theory, and show it's not true. So there you go.
Yes, my goodness.
A long way to go to get to a conclusion that's very important.
Well, it was excellent material, and I would really suggest that the listeners get a hold of your CDs, and quickly, Olaf, please tell them how they can do that.
Thank you. Yeah. You can go to Before 2012, the number 2012, Before 2012, and Beyond.com, all one word, Before 2012 and Beyond.com. And you will see on that website, they're the ones who do my duplication, and they handle the distribution of the CDs. I do some of my own, but they're the primary ones. And they have a complete list on their website of all of the CDs that are currently available, although we're well ahead of what you see there, producing more all the time, so they'll be listing more as they're produced. There are a few regular CDs that are becoming available, but 95% or 98% of what we've got out there at the moment are MP3 CDs. So on a single CD, you've got like 11 and a half, 12 and a half, about an average of 12 hours of material. And the first CD, which you can get by ordering, is you can order right there on the website. The first CD has the Hidden Family of Jesus, some of the material we're talking about, the blotting out of the New Testament, some of the material we've been talking about, all kinds of things related to what we've been discussing here, as well as material about Satan's throne on Mars and all kinds of other interesting stuff. So there's no shortage of fascinating things in just that first 12-hour CD. The second one, approximately 12 hours. They're a little bit above or below. The second one and third one, so forth, get deeper into a lot of these subjects. They get into Mars more. Every CD's got something about Mars or planetary, Planet X stuff and all of that material. I like to put a little of that on every one. I think of it as dessert, so a little reward for you after listening.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. So I got a little of that on almost every CD. We may run out at some point, somewhere well down the road here, but we're trying to keep that as a policy for all the CDs for a while there. And if you subscribe, you get one every month, and it's 12 hours worth of material, which I used to charge about $120 for. If you subscribe, it's only $49, automatically deducted, automatically shipped every month. And then starting, there's some freebies that you'll get, depending on what they're offering. You have to look at the website. There'll be some freebies that you'll get for subscribing as well. And then starting at number 7, with CD number 7, there's a bonus CD with brand new update material, and some of that's amazing stuff, by the way. And then there's a third CD which contains a data set, and that data set is printed material, footnoted, documented stuff, charts, graphs, illustrations, artwork, various graphic stuff I did too, and I can't explain it over the radio here. But to show you with your own eyes, you can see what I'm talking about, so you know what I'm talking about, and it's stuff that's so controversial, it's for your eyes only, okay? So you'll have to wait until you get to that part. Now, you can order some of this stuff. You can order all in advance. If you want to catch up to the latest one, which I think we're up to number 9 or 10 at the moment. We've been doing this for a while now. You can catch up to them. You can order them all at once if you like. There's a whole bunch of free goodies that you'll get. So you get a pile of stuff. And the longer you stay with it, the more stuff you get. So trust me on this. This is a good thing to do. You'll find that nobody has the kind of information that we're putting out there for the specific reason that if they did, I wouldn't do it.
Yeah.
Somebody else was doing this stuff. I wouldn't waste my time on it.
Right.
Go after the stuff that the other guys aren't telling you, the other guys aren't doing.
Right.
So there are a lot of Christian ministries out there with lots of tapes and CDs and DVDs and all of that sort of thing. I try not to duplicate anything that they're doing. Now, they may cover the Holy Grail, but they don't cover it the way I do.
That's true.
You got the Lost Secrets of the Holy Grail on that first CD as well, Part 1, Part 2, and Part 3 are second and third CDs. But you'll find we get into the Mark of the Beast, and if you've heard my file on the Mark of the Beast, which is up there on George Ann's site, you know what I do on the Mark of the Beast is not what the other guys are doing. And that should give you an indication what I'm talking about. What I do is different, and I do a lot of in-depth research. As you can tell from this discussion here that we just done, I go way beyond what all these other people are doing. I check out everything they're saying, and then I go beyond that. And I go back into the ancient sources. Because I don't care what Joe Blow wrote this paperback last month. That doesn't mean anything. I want to find out what the early sources say, what's in the Bible, what's in the Talmud, what's in the early church fathers' writings, what's in the archaeology, the scientific evidence, if there's any DNA work. I want to find out what has the most high reliability of being accurate as far as the history is concerned. My job is to get you the history behind the headlines, to go back and find out what really happened and what's really going on. And that's why I get into the hidden agenda behind current events, and I go into the secret societies and it's really manipulating oil prices and stuff like that. I'm basically a writer and a journalist. I mean, I started out working on a newspaper. I go after this the way a good investigative reporter would. I mean, yes, I did study biblical and systematic theology, and yes, I was an energy consultant and so forth. And it just helps me to go after some of these topics better. But, ultimately, that's what I do. I research, and then I write, and I talk about it. And that's,
well, Olaf, you're excellent. You really are, and many, many people love your material. And
Oh, yeah, people are told when they get it. I mean, the reviews that I've got here, we got to put up some more reviews, but you can see reviews over there on that website, and we got a lot more that we're going to be putting up from people who are getting the new CDs and so forth, and you'll see. I mean, I'm not fooling here. This stuff, you can't get it anywhere else. I got it right here in front of me. Let me read a few of these real quick, because I know we've got right here.
We got to hustle here.
It says, this is information I've not found anywhere else. That's from, I can't tell you his name, but it's CM in Maryland. I've literally worn out some of your tapes listening to them. Every time I listen, I learn something new.
Yes.
Outstanding work, fascinating insights into major themes underlying biblical accounts. It revitalizes my Bible study. That's from JC in Texas. I can't tell you how much I enjoy your tapes each month. That's from a guy in Florida. Thrilling. Treasure, I love your work. I am astonished. I'm sick with delight. I must do my part to keep you going. That's from somebody in Montana. Another one. I was really surprised. I'd read Dr. Martin's book, but I learned so many new things. Excellent job. That's somebody in Wisconsin. It goes on like this. And I got some new ones here, which if I can find a couple real quick here. God bless you, Olaf. Your audio files on the CDs here are wonderful. Olaf, yours is some of the best stuff out there. I learned so much from you. That's from somebody in Colorado. I have ordered the 6-CD set, which I have literally listened to completely and enjoyed immensely. As a subscriber, I became a subscriber after listening to the first 6 CDs.
Yeah.
Forward to many hours of information, thought-provoking, and spiritually challenging listening and study. That's from somebody in California. So this is, just a few of what I've got here. People really like it. And
well, Olaf, it's well-researched. And, what it reminds me of is Dr. Ernest Martin.
Well, I was a big fan of Ernest.
I know you were, but you have kind of carried on things, digging into subjects deeply, like he did.
And David Seeloff and there are others followed in his footsteps and so on.
Yeah. Oh, I love working with David Seeloff. He's a wonderful person.
Yeah, and look, these, David and I don't agree on every little thing either, and I didn't agree with everything that Ernest did. He didn't agree with everything I came to, but we shared research with one another and so on. I understand that these people and I, we're human beings. We make mistakes, and I try to find them and correct them and move on, and Ernest did too. He changed his date for the birth of Jesus, from 2 BC to 3 BC, which I agree with him. That was the correct thing to do. And we'll be talking more about ancient calendars and dates and stuff like that at another time. But, we're not perfect people, but that's the whole point. You learn by recognizing and admitting your errors and mistakes, and that's how you go on and discover something new.
That's right.
Discover something new by clinging to your false assumptions. And that's why it's so necessary to go back into these things and check it again and again. And I recheck and triple check and quadruple check some of these things.
Olaf, one of the things, too, that I really appreciate about you is that when you discover that you have made an error, you make no bones about it. You admit it. And some of these people cannot admit it when they make an error.
Well,
and,
let me say this. A lot of people have one big discovery. Albert Einstein said only one new idea in his life, which was relativity.
Yeah.
And, people honored him greatly for that. He's a brilliant guy, but he said, everything I've done is basically based on relativity. It's all derived from that. He had only one really big new idea. And you look at a guy like Giacomo Vici. He's got a number of major accomplishments. He's an Emmy award-winning producer. He tracked Lost Tribes of Israel all over the world, got an Emmy award for it. I saw that documentary. It's excellent. Highly recommend it. He's done a number of things, but that doesn't mean everything he's got to do is going to be perfect. Right. But when you get awarded, when you get published, when you get honored, when you start to believe your own press clippings and you start to think that you're infallible, get into trouble. And if you don't have a lot of discoveries, if you have only, one or two or something, then there's a temptation to just rest on that one laurel and never take a risk and go out and do something else, or to defend that with your life.
Yeah. And
if Einstein had been wrong, and he had defended that so fiercely, you see the problem there. So what I've done is I keep going, and I keep looking for new stuff. And I keep digging into those little dark corners. And so, I've been wrong a few times here and there. I thought the oil price was going to top out at $100 a barrel. No, it didn't. It's still going. I don't know when it's going to top out at this point, but there's speculators. It's hard to anticipate what they'll do.
What goes up must come down.
Well, let's hope so.
Yeah. Well, Olaf,
you wonder now. But
it's been wonderful having you here this evening. And everybody, go to Olaf Hage's website, theTimeQuest.com. All one word, theTimeQuest.com. And we will be back. We are going to be doing a very interesting set of audios on the calendar. And you won't want to miss that.
I think we can tell them it's going to be called.
Yeah, the Time Bandits. And boy, are they ever. That is a very appropriate file name for these guys.
Those bloodsuckers, when you think about it.
Yeah. So God bless everybody out there that's listening, and God bless you, Olaf.
God bless you also, Georgia.
Thank you. Good night, everybody.